All right, there's one video I've been putting off for a little while, and things got sidetracked, and something else came up and all that. But it has to do with playing a certain game that's really popular right now from Bethesda on a certain graphics card that has big problems with it. Or I should say, a certain series of graphics card by one company that has a problem with it. Yep, we'll look into it. So the game obviously is Starfield. When this game first came out, the pre-release version of it, or the early release version of the people that pre-ordered the $100 version, it did not have drivers, did not work on the Arc series of GPUs from Intel at all. A750, A770, nada, nothing. And which is a little bit of a surprise because these cards are comparable to like an RTX 3060 or an RTX 3060 Ti, somewhere in that area, which are, although not perfect, do give a decent playing experience. And in fact, in some cases, I'm getting with an RTX 3060 Ti, I can run it with 1440p at medium settings with, I believe it's about 75% resolution scale and DLSS, not DLSS, but FSR 2.0 or FSR 2, whatever, running on it. And it does okay. Gameplay itself, when I was testing, I was getting 40 to 48 frames per second. Gameplay itself, when I'm streaming, is more in the neighborhood of a solid 31 to 38, depending on what area I'm in. But not horrible, not great, not 60 frames per second, but certainly playable. One of the biggest problems I had with Starfield was getting it to start. In fact, there were several times when I was first trying to do this that even with a new West driver, which is a week or two old at this point, or a couple weeks old at this point, it's still, when I tried to play it or tried to get it to run, I could get to the menu screen, I could choose to start a game, and boom, gone, done. By the same token, I could start in the same place or the same saves on the setup with the 3060 Ti, and it worked fine. And in fact, I'd done that. I did that several times, and I went back to make sure and checked. So at this point, I'm thinking that the 3060 Ti, I could run this on a little bit lower settings, and I could have a great playing experience. And in fact, it's not a very bad playing experience. It's a very good-looking game, running at, say, 1440 medium with 30 to 35 frames per second. It's a solid frames per second. It doesn't dip. It doesn't have problems when you're in a firefight. It still maintains over 30. So it's still pretty decent looking. And the game visually is very attractive. It's a very good looking game. Okay, step two, I go back and I look. It's like, okay, playing around a little bit with some settings and trying to figure some things out. And I set my monitor itself to 1080p. Now, setting the monitor to 1080p and then trying to run the game, lo and behold, it starts. I'm like, okay, this is a little bit strange. When I tried to set the resolution in game to 1440, because it's a 1440p monitor, it actually worked. So again, I'm thinking a little bit weird. Now it worked, but it worked with some problems. It worked with some shading problems. It worked when I was changing resolutions and scale and all that. I had some weird artifacts around the side. I had some blue tinge and some weird things going on in the corner. But after playing around with this a little bit and trying to do some adjustments and trying to work some things out, I finally came to a medium with about 73%, I think it's scaling on it, using FSR 2. And it looked okay. Now, there is some screen tearing. There is noticeably more screen tearing on this running, and it'll average between, say, 50 and 60 or 62 frames per second or so. There's noticeably more screen tearing with this. And in fact, once I start the game or change settings or whatever, it will vary in between around 60 to down around 30-something, still with a little bit of tearing, back up to the 60s. All this time on medium settings with some tearing. So I thought, okay, now let me go back and see if I can't start this again with my monitor's native resolution sitting at 1440. Lo and behold, this time it worked. Now, I have no idea why it wouldn't the last time. It would go to the menu screen, and I'd try to start a game, and it would die. And it did this repeatedly, and I was able to get this actually on camera a couple of times doing it because it was so repeatable. But now this has actually got to a point where it's playable. Now, I don't quite think it looks as good or as sharp as the 3060 Ti. I am not going to complain because it's still a decent looking experience, but there was just something that looked a little bit more rich and something that looked a little bit better and a little bit more finely tuned. And it might have something to do with those occasional screen tears, those occasional flickers, or something that doesn't look quite right with the Arc GPU. But I will tell you that for not being able to run the game at all, for some people when this started, and the initial problems that I had, the original issues trying to get the game going and thinking, okay, this is going to be a fail video, I'm pretty pleased with the result, and I'm not unhappy to try to play it on that machine. And in fact, it was after a few minutes, I kind of got used to it a little bit. Now, I don't want to completely get used to it because who wants to play a game that looks, when it's messing with your head a little bit, you'll get a headache. But it wasn't horrible, and I could probably turn down the resolution or the scaling or something so it's a little bit easier and doesn't screen tear. But I have to admit, it worked. And maybe Intel is getting somewhere with their drivers. Maybe some of the updates that have and some of the patches for this game that have come out have done it some good because it now seems to work on this hardware a little bit better. And the strange thing is, one of the things Bethesda has said reportedly, and I've overheard or seen clips where they're talking about, well, maybe people ought to just get better hardware. The hardware is getting cheaper, but it's not just something you can go out when you spend $100 on a game or $70 on a game and go upgrade your entire computer system. Certainly not if, some of us that are on a budget. So for them to say that, I just feel is pretty irresponsible. And for this game to be as popular as it is, and for this game to be one of those things that, hey, we have to have it. It's one of those, really earth-shattering type of games. Visually, it is very good. The gameplay, although sometimes boring, is interesting. It's not, I'm going to say, the best thing for streaming. But one of the other comments that somebody on their team have allegedly made, I didn't hear this directly, but one of the comments that I did hear kind of third hand was that, that the Arc GPUs didn't meet minimum specs in the first place. What your minimum specs are last generation's GPUs. How can that Arc GPU that's on par with some newer stuff not be minimum specs for your game? So it's a little bit confusing, but I'm glad to see some kind of progress. I'm glad to see this actually working, where it looks like that the game is at least playable. It does look pretty good. There is some weird stuff going on. You might have to, if you do have an Arc GPU and you're trying to play this game, have some patience. Try a couple of different screen resolutions natively on your monitor and see if that doesn't help kind of kickstart something. It worked for me. I changed the resolution to 1080p. It started, it played, so I went back and I changed it to 1440p, and it actually worked. Now it will just be a matter of kind of tweaking those settings, whether medium or low. Definitely not high or ultra. There's no way this game is going to play at 1080p or 1440p ultra on an Arc 8750 or on RTX 3060 Ti. It's just, it might happen. You might get a solid 20-something frames per second, and if you can play it like that, go ahead. But there's firefights and stuff like that that are involved that might take a little bit more concentration. Might take a little bit more notice than 20 frames per second is all I'm saying. You might be able to get away with a game like Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 20 frames per second. You cannot get away with this game at 30 frames or higher. I would say a good solid 30 frames, not some dropouts, but a good solid nothing below 30 frames per second I think would be okay. You can get this game to run at that. And if you can play around with the visuals for something you're comfortable with, it works out okay. So although the jury is still out, I've only probably about 10 or 12 hours into the game total. It's an interesting game, but there are parts of it that are kind of boring. It's not, like I said, it's not really streaming material, even though I have streamed it on that Purple channel a little bit, and I will do so again soon, just to get more time in with it and just adventure more along with the game. It's not something that is terribly interesting from what I've heard until you get a little bit further into the story. So we'll go with it at that. We'll say what it is. It's It is a decent title. It does take a little bit to get used to, especially if, like myself, I used to play on console, so switching over to PC with the Bethesda title, the controls are very different from the game that I've usually played, which is No Man's Sky. So it takes a little bit of getting used to there. But it works, and it works on that A750. So I'm pretty happy that one of the things I thought I wasn't going to be able to do on Coolblue, the new setup that I'm using for editing and some gaming, I can do, and I'm pretty happy. So, hey, it is what it is. So is it the best experience in the world? Probably not. Is it a decent experience? Yeah. And is it playable and passable? Absolutely. So if you've got an ARC A750 or an ARC A770, then yeah, you probably already figured out by now that you can play it, but you might have to play around with some stuff. So I'm kind of interested. If you do have this game, what video card are you using to play it on? What kind of settings are you using? And what does it look like to you? I mean, is it you're playing it and it's passable, or are you playing it on settings that you're really, really happy with and the game looks good to you and you're very happy with the flow of the game and how it looks and all that stuff? I'm kind of curious to know. So leave me comments, let me know what's going on. But for the time being, I might, now that I've got it working on at least the 3060 Ti and the ARC A750, I've got an RX 6600 XT that I also have. So maybe it's time to do some comparing with the three of those and see what kind of results I get. But that's going to take some testing. That's going to take a little bit of effort because I'm going to have to pick one system to do that in, and then I'm going to have to try all three video cards, fresh drive install, and try to make the resolutions and the settings as identical as I can to kind of compare all three of those against each other. But it's not out of the realm of possibility. It'll probably be coming up soon, so we'll see what happens. In any case, very curious to hear what your comments are if you are playing this game and what video card you're using, or what CPU you're using, what processor. That won't have so much to do as the video card. I have a feeling that this is going to be a video card killer, but still curious to know. So don't forget, I am streaming on that Purple channel occasionally. I have been streaming a little bit of Starfield. I probably will stream a little bit more of it. I will swap back and forth that to No Man's Sky. Don't forget to visit me on my other socials. This failed experiment, or this semi-failed experiment, or the semi-successful experiment, I'll go ahead and write about it in my tech blog on ThatPaulGuy.tech. And yeah, if you're interested in just knowing what's going on in the life of Paul, it's over on BuyMeACoffee.com. So I will put out a video before too long, just kind of refreshing where I am with everything and what socials I'm working on and all that stuff. But if you don't visit any of the socials and you found this video at least helpful or entertaining or something informative in some way, go ahead and throw a like on it for me. If you're not already subscribed, please do so. There's other videos coming up. They have been fewer and farther between because I do have a real job, and sometimes that takes priority over streaming or putting out YouTube videos. I can't apologize for that. It's what's financing the channel. So that it is what it is. But if you don't do any of that stuff, I'm just going to ask you to do one thing, and that's be good to each other. Be nice. Smile, wave, hold the door open, push the button on an elevator. You know what? Today I had the opportunity, somebody got in the elevator with their hands full. It doesn't take any effort at all to reach over and ask them which floor they're going to and hit that button. So just something nice, something kind. You know, it's absolutely free. It doesn't cost you anything to do something nice. So until next time, when I get myself into something I got no business getting into, I'll see you later.